Have you ever wondered what happened to the Native Americans after the United States was formed? How did a people who once thrived across vast lands end up confined to reservations, stripped of their rights, land, and culture? What cruel policies forced them to walk thousands of miles, endure massacres, and see their traditions erased? The truth is dark, painful, and filled with betrayal. If you want to know the answers to these questions, stay connected with us and watch the full video. Long before the arrival of European settlers, Native American tribes thrived across the vast lands that would one day become the United States. They had their own cultures, traditions, and ways of life, deeply connected to nature. However, with the formation of the United States, their fate took a dark turn. What followed was centuries of cruelty, betrayal, and suffering at the hands of the US government, justified under the banners of expansion, progress, and manifest destiny. The cruelty began with forced removal. The Indian Removal Act of 1830, signed by President Andrew Jackson, was one of the earliest government-sanctioned policies that devastated Native communities. Under this law, tens of thousands of Native Americans were forcibly uprooted from their ancestral lands and pushed westward. The most infamous consequence was the Trail of Tears, where the Cherokee, along with several other tribes, were forced to march over 1,000 miles. Hunger, disease, and exhaustion claimed the lives of nearly 4,000 Cherokee people. Historical records, including eyewitness accounts and government reports, document the brutality of this forced migration. Reverend Evan Jones, a missionary who accompanied the Cherokee, wrote of the suffering, describing children who perished in their mother's arms and entire families buried along the trail. The violence did not end with forced removals. Throughout the 19th century, Native Americans faced relentless warfare as the US military sought to suppress resistance and secure land for settlers. The Sand Creek Massacre of 1864 is one of the most horrifying examples. Colonel John Chivington led a militia attack on a peaceful Cheyenne and Arapaho village in Colorado. Despite the fact that the villagers had raised a white flag in surrender, soldiers slaughtered more than 200 men, women, and children. Survivors recounted the brutal scene, with bodies mutilated and scalps taken as trophies. Congressional investigations later confirmed the atrocities, but justice was never served. Broken promises defined US government relations with Native Americans. Hundreds of treaties were signed, often under coercion, guaranteeing land and protection. Yet, almost all were violated. The Black Hills of South Dakota were promised to the Lakota Sioux in the Treaty of Fort Laramie, 1868, but after gold was discovered, the US government ignored its obligations and seized the land. This betrayal led to the Great Sioux War, culminating in the Battle of the Little Big Horn, where Native warriors, led by Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, briefly triumphed against US forces. However, their resistance was met with severe retribution, and within a few years, the Sioux were confined to reservations, their way of life irreversibly shattered. Throughout history, several Native American leaders resisted US government oppression. Tecumseh, the Shawnee leader, sought to unite tribes against American expansion and fought fiercely in the early 19th century. Geronimo, the Apache warrior, led resistance efforts against US and Mexican forces for decades. Red Cloud, a leader of the Oglala Lakota, successfully waged war against the US military in the 1860s, forcing them to recognize native land rights temporarily. These leaders, among many others, symbolized the unyielding resistance against injustice and the struggle to preserve native sovereignty. Assimilation policies further eroded Native American identity. The Dawes Act of 1887 sought to break tribal landholding by allotting individual plots to native families while selling off the remaining land to white settlers. The goal was to force Native Americans into a Western-style agrarian lifestyle, but in reality, it resulted in the loss of millions of acres of tribal land. Between 1887 and 1934, two-thirds of all native land was taken. Documents from the Bureau of Indian Affairs detail how these policies aimed to erase tribal cultures, pushing native children into boarding schools where they were forbidden from speaking their languages or practicing their traditions. First-hand testimonies from survivors of these schools describe beatings, malnourishment, and psychological abuse meant to strip them of their heritage. Even in the 20th century, Native Americans continued to suffer under government policies. In the mid-1900s, the US launched the Termination Policy, aiming to dissolve tribal governments and assimilate Native people into mainstream society. More than 100 tribes lost federal recognition, stripping them of land and resources. The consequences were devastating, leading to widespread poverty and displacement. Government reports from this period acknowledge the failure of the policy, yet the damage had already been done. Despite centuries of oppression, Native Americans have persevered. The American Indian movement of the 1960s and 70s brought national attention to their struggles. Events like the occupation of Alcatraz Island and the standoff at Wounded Knee forced the government to acknowledge past wrongs. While some progress has been made in restoring tribal sovereignty and securing rights, the scars of history remain. The evidence is undeniable. Historical documents, first-hand accounts, congressional records, and government reports all testify to the cruelty inflicted upon Native Americans by the U.S. government. Their suffering was not accidental but the result of deliberate policies aimed at eradicating their cultures and seizing their lands. Yet, against all odds, they have survived, carrying forward their traditions, stories, and resilience in the face of a history that sought to erase them. If you found this video insightful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring forgotten histories to light and ensures that the stories of resilience and struggle are never lost. Thank you for watching.